All right. Well, thank you for coming today to the first plant talk of the season. We have 8 of them lined up this year, so lots of interesting offerings. I'm Michelle DeRusha with Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. Today we have NSA Horticulture Program Coordinator Bob Henrickson talking to us about the great plants selections for 2025. So just real quick, I have a couple housekeeping details to cover before we get started. If you're new to the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum, we are a nonprofit organization with a mission to plant Nebraska for healthy people, vibrant communities, and a resilient environment. We are a member organization, which means our work is funded in part by donations from people like you. So thank you. If you're not already a member and are curious about becoming one or learning more, you can find out more about our different membership levels and benefits at our website, which is plantnebraska.org. And then the link to the URL for our membership page is right there on the screen. It is plantnebraska.org/join. You can also find out more information about all of our upcoming plant talks on our website, plantnebraska.org/plant talks. And the next one, just to give you a heads up, is scheduled for January 23rd. That's a week from today. And we're going to have the folks from Lewis and Clark Visitor Center in Nebraska City. That's an NSA affiliate site. And they'll be talking about native trees, invasive species, and controlled burns. So lots on their agenda for that discussion. We do record all of the plant talks, and we will send out a link to the recording at the end of the day today. So just so you know, even if you register for plant talks down the line and you can't attend the webinar in person, we'll send you a link to watch it later. So just a reminder to we have you all on mute. So if you just stay on mute for a while, we will have time for questions at the end. And if you have questions, in the meantime, you can always put them in the chat and we will keep an eye on that. And Bob will answer some of them as he goes along. So I will hand it over to Bob Henrickson now.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay, Michelle?
Yes, I can.
All right, excellent. That means you guys can too. Wow, good crowd. You guys must not have anything better to do over the lunch hour than listen to me. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And, I'm assuming a lot of you have heard about the Great Plants for the Great Plains here. I'm here to talk about it today. And for some reason, my slides aren't advancing. Why is not advancing? There we go. Yeah, so the Great Plants for the Great Plains, we love our logo, by the way, promoting plains-proven plants for beautiful landscapes. And maybe you're familiar with the program, maybe you're not, but the Great Plants for the Great Plains is a plant promotion program that was started way back in 1998. And gosh, I should have the first plants in my brain that were recognized as plants of the year, but lead plant, I know, was the perennial of the year. The grass of the year was little blue stem. The shrub of the year at the time was Aronia. And these plants have all kind of become mainstay in our landscapes. So the idea is we, the consumer, create the demand. So these plants may not be readily available yet, but we're out to promote them and then out for you to ask them at your local garden center, ask for them, because again, we create the demand. Just want to give a quick shout out to a radio program. Hopefully you have tuned into this before. If not, you're welcome to tune in. I host a radio program on local radio station KZUM. And if you're outside of Lincoln, you can tune in at kzum.org anywhere in the world. If you take a vacation to Guam, you can watch How's It Growing. Why not? Anyway, every Wednesday, 11 till noon, where I'm dedicated to answering your growing questions. This image you see here is a wild edible hike in Wilderness Park. It takes place every year around mid-April, and we're teaming up with Conservation Nebraska again to provide that. So come on and get out in nature and look for some wild edible plants. And these are wild edible plants you don't have to worry about harvesting. They're all invasive weeds. So harvest away. Okay, so why great plants? Well, we're looking to expand the palette of plant material that's appropriate for our climate. And as you know, Nebraska is kind of a tough place for plants to grow. What we're after is sustainable low input landscapes. And what sustainable to me means low input. Low input means low water use. You know, you don't have to water these plants once they're established, or if we're in an extreme drought, maybe you have to water them once or twice. But they're tough plants for the Great Plains, some tough dudes, as I like to call them.
Bob, you got muted. You need to unmute yourself, please.
How did I unmute? I don't
There
know.
you
What I didn't click anything, so I don't know how I muted myself, but somehow I did. You can hear me fine now, I'm assuming. Yeah. So anyway, if any of you have planted the yellow buckeye or have it in the landscape or know of it in the landscape, by all means, chime in the chat. Only if it's a good looking tree, right? But anyway, look at that specimen. So this is the largest one I've ever seen, but unfortunately it's not in Nebraska. And we were on this tour at our nation's capital. This is right outside the nation's capital, the biggest yellow buckeye I've ever seen. Oh, I'm having a tough time with the advancement here. Why is it not moving? Well, I'm able to advance it with this then. Okay, fine. I was able to do it. Sorry about that, folks. Well, anyway, now we step back from the tree and you can see the full size of that big boy. Again, if I were to turn the camera to the left, you'd be able to see the nation's capital. So pretty cool, gorgeous tree. Really a vastly overlooked tree. Now, this is not as nice of a specimen as the one you just saw. This is actually growing in Omaha in the Benson area, the largest one we know of in Nebraska. And indeed, if we had a category for champion trees for the yellow buckeye, this would undoubtedly be the champion. Now, it looks a little scruffy looking at it, but look where it's growing too. It's in that proverbial death zone between the street and the sidewalk. And I imagine over the decades, this tree has had, some street work or sidewalk work or something that have kind of hit the root system a little bit, but still holding its own in Benson. Here's where the yellow buckeye is native in the world, so it doesn't have a large native range, but certainly the Appalachian Mountains, West Virginia and Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, southern Ohio, and along the Ohio River there in Indiana, as you can see. So not a very wide distribution for this tree and I think that's another reason to plant more of it, to kind of for posterity, if nothing else. It's got interesting winter buds. I think the winter buds are really cool. And if you know the Buckeye family, there's one of them in the family is called horse chestnut. And horse chestnut is from across the pond in England, Europe. And the buds, if you look at them in the wintertime, it's like they've been shellacked. They're shiny, and if you touch them, they're sticky. And that sticky resin on there is what bees gather to make propolis out of. But the yellow buckeye lacks that sticky resin that you see on the bud, but still the bud's impressive. And then when it's leafing out in the spring, it almost looks like it's flowering as those buds swell, and then the new foliage comes out of those buds. And the new foliage is tropical looking. It has that palmate hand-shaped leaf, if you will. And the leaflets are clean all year long. They look great. And it gets the name yellow buckeye from the light yellow color of the flower spike. The Ohio buckeye, the horse chestnut, and others don't have this yellow color. It's more of a pure white color with kind of the anthers inside kind of have some reddish tinge, but you can see the yellow buckeye is more of I don't know how to describe that color, kind of a pinkish red, I guess. But anyway, a beautiful flower spike. Those are around 6-inch spikes that you're seeing, and they bloom in early spring, usually around late April, early May. And one of the first plants to leaf out in the spring too. But for those early emerging bees, that are emerging out of their hibernation looking for food, that's where our tree species really are important to our early season pollinators, and the buckeyes are top-notch pollinators when it comes to that. Obviously, no bees on this picture, but still, I've been around buckeyes when they're in full bloom and they're humming with activity. So a good pollinator plant too, any of the buckeyes, but obviously the yellow buckeye. Yeah, bumblebees, metallic green sweat bees, flies, and many other wasp species take advantage of the yellow buckeye. This flower cluster you see is a little bit more in bud stage than the previous picture, which was more in full bloom. So they kind of command your attention even when they're in bud stage. So really cool tree, the yellow buckeye. And then later on in the season, towards fall, it forms buckeye fruit. And all the buckeyes have a little bit different fruit. What makes the yellow buckeye unique compared to Ohio buckeye is this fruit cluster or capsule is smooth to the touch, whereas Ohio buckeyes will have little projections on it, little bumps, and the horse chestnut has those little bumps kind of on steroids. They're like a quarter inch to a half inch projections, whereas the yellow buckeyes you can see is smooth. And of course, that beautiful tropical looking foliage. And then you open up that husk, and inside is two beautiful seeds. Sometimes you can have three, but more often than not, it's 1 to 2. And there again, the smooth outside of the husk. But if you rub your thumb or your finger on the inside of that husk, you'll see it's as soft as a pillow. And I don't know if it's to cushion the seed as it's falling from the tree, who knows? But still, it's pretty much a wonder of nature. And of course, the seeds, if you've ever held a buckeye seed or messed around with them, they're smooth, they're slick, they look like they've been varnished and stained, if you will. But there you can see in the picture where it gets the name buckeye, or it looks like a deer or a buck's eye. That's where the name buckeye comes from. How cool is that? You don't even have to be an Ohio State fan to love the Buckeyes. And then here it is in fall color. And I think that's what makes the yellow buckeye unique, is the fall color is consistent when compared to the other buckeyes. I've seen this gorgeous pumpkin orange color on Ohio buckeyes, but usually that's 1 in 5 years. Whereas the yellow buckeye, it's consistent year after year, that nice, beautiful pumpkin orange fall color. And some may say, well, yeah, but isn't it a messy tree with all that fruit and those husks? What you do, and this picture is a good example, I would take the drip line underneath this tree. I would take my mulch bed all the way out to the drip line. So when the fruit falls, it falls within my mulch bed, not in my grass. But if it does fall in the grass, rest assured, the squirrels will clean it up. The husks kind of shrivel up and disappear. So it's just kind of part of the landscape. So don't really worry about it being a mess. I don't consider this tree being messy at all, but there's kind of a close-up of the fall color. Beautiful tree, widely overlooked, underutilized. There's not a whole lot of them planted in Nebraska. Let's change that. Okay. Unless there's any questions about the Buckeye, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Well, let me look quick. Yeah, how fast does it grow? Good question, Denise. And I should have brought that up, but the Buckeyes in general, let me back this up a little bit. The Buckeyes in general are what we would term a slow growing tree. And what I say to people, slow growing, fast growing is all relative to what the soil you have, how much moisture we're getting year to year. But so I would say in the first several years of establishment, yes, they just kind of sit there and get the root system established because they have one heck of a root system. And but after that, they would put on around a foot and a half a year. So definitely not a fast growing tree, but slower growing trees tend to be trees that are less likely to be broken up in ice storms and heavy snow events too. So it's just one of those trees, Denise, that it just gets better every year. Let's see. Beekeeper does not hibernate in the winter. Instead, they stay active inside the hive, huddled together, generate. Yeah, good point. Yes, I realize that, but it's not like they're flying out looking for flowers to utilize as we get into our warmness of the spring. So that's what I meant by that. Thanks for clarifying that, Darren. I agree. They're certainly active in the hive, keeping each other warm. Yeah, Bob, the wide shot of the tree doesn't look as tropical. I realize that, but once you get close to the tree, that's when you can kind of notice its tropical foliage. Yes, pretty much any tree from a distance is not going to necessarily look tropical. And Amy, could you repeat that thought about the drip line? What I mean by the drip line is that any tree has what's called a drip line. And so during a rain event or whatever, the rainwater is dripping off the leaves. So the very outside of the line of that tree canopy is what we call the drip line. And so for a lot of trees, if we can extend our mulch bed underneath that tree, at least out to the drip line, you've got a much happier tree than one that doesn't have that. And it's not absolutely necessary, but it is just a good thing to practice to do to create a landscape where you have ground covers and, native sedges, things underneath your tree, a mulch bed. So when the leaves drop, the leaves stay, you're not raking them away. The old leave the leaves thing is what I'm getting at with that. Yeah. Yeah, and I see Karen planted one the fall of 2023. So far, so good. That's good to hear. Yeah, it's just an awesome tree. Yeah, and Hannah, good point. Morton Arboretum, I know, has some good things to say about it. Are the seeds poisonous to any farm animals or wildlife? Squirrels eat them, and I know Ohio buckeyes are poisonous. And however, the yellow buckeye, I'm not sure. I would guess that it is. So I would not plant this tree next to my horse stall or in an area where cattle are grazing, just to be on the safe side. And certainly, if you do say I have to have this tree and you're around your horses, yeah, certainly do some research. I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that without doing more research on it being appropriate near livestock.
Hey Bob,
But
will
yeah,
we have any at the sale? Someone was curious about that.
yes, we sure will. We will have some at Spring Affair, but I'm telling you, it does not look impressive in a container. And I think that's one of the reasons you don't see it common in the nursery trade, is because it doesn't make a fast buck. You'll see it's a smaller tree because in production they're not shooting up to 6 feet, right? It's going to be more like a 2 to 3 foot little seedling, even if it's in a bigger pot. So don't be afraid of that size. They'll come out of it. They're
How tall does it get, Bob, in maturity?
Yeah, I missed that question. Good point, Michelle.
Okay.
I would say in Nebraska, you can expect, a full grown tree to be 50 to 60 feet. And as you saw that one that I took a picture of at the very first with me in DC, I mean, that tree is pushing 70 feet, if not bigger. But in Nebraska, if you have a 50-foot yellow buckeye, I'll come and look at your tree and shake your hand, maybe even give you a tree hug. So, but don't expect huge tree in Nebraska. I think we had one other, did we, on the chat?
Anne is asking about a particular tree east of the Walter Scott Engineering Building. I don't know if you're familiar with that. She wants to know if it's still there. I have no idea.
Oh, there was a buckeye there at the engineering building on campus. Boy, I with all the progress there at the engineering building, I have a feeling it was taken out.
I know, right? Because they put in that big Hewitt building. So. And
I know you used to be one by Old Father Hall, close to the stadium. I don't know if that's still there, but it's Ann. Hi, Ann. Worth taking a look. But yeah, not a whole lot on campus to point out to you, unfortunately, that I can think of here in Maxwell Arboretum on East Campus, for example. There should be. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Yeah, okay. I think we're caught up on the chat. Now I'll move on to the hi, Dean, by the way. Move on to the shrub of the year. The shrub of the year is an exciting shrub, guys, and it's pretty new to landscaping here in Nebraska. I can't guarantee again that all of your favorite garden centers are going to carry it yet, but it's worth asking for and worth telling them to get. Does it look like a willow at first glance, right? No, it does not. And this is a sage leaf willow called Iceberg Alley. And sage leaf willow is actually native to the northern reaches of North America and into Canada. In fact, this iceberg alley was discovered from a native population in Ontario. So we know it's rock solid, winter hardy. I think the questions we Nebraskans had was, how does it do with our heat of the summer? And Todd Fowler from Fowler Nursery in York, Nebraska, is the one that recommended this, and people voted on it. And I should explain, when people recommend this plant as a candidate for Great Plants for the Great Plains, which you can do, by the way, then I solicit the help of nursery professionals, landscape designers, to whittle that list down to 3 candidates per category. So we have 3 shrub candidates that were voted on by members of the Nebraska Nursery and Landscape Association, and they are the ones that voted for this, all of these winners. So then you, as the public, are treated to the shrub of the year, tree of the year, to be able to see what they are. All right. Okay, I see that from Amber. Buckeyes are still in the northwest corner of Bessie Hall, just east of the stadium. Very good. And I'm hoping it's doing well yet, Amber. But look at that foliage up close. Grays, the silvers and grays in the landscape, in my opinion, they go with anything. So what can you combine the shrub with? Gosh, pretty much anything. And a lot of folks are using it as a backdrop to their perennial gardens. What you're seeing here is full size is roughly 5 by 5 feet. And just like all of the willows, they respond very well to pruning. So say it gets up to 5 feet, you need to tidy it up a little bit, or you want to cut it back to more manageable 2 to 3 feet. You can cut these things back any time of year, and they respond very well to pruning. Not that you would need to. I'm just saying, if you feel you have to prune it, it responds very well to that. So there you can see it. It almost looks like a sage when combined with perennials in the landscape. You can see that picture on the left combined with the Allium millennium. And then I think with the grasses, it looks great as a border along a hot, sidewalk or something like that. It does great. So certainly heat tolerant and drought tolerant as well once it gets established. And visiting with Todd Fowler about establishment, he said, yes, just like any plant. And willows, folks, if you buy one of these and it's in a pot, my guess is the root system is going to be pretty robust, meaning they dry out fast in between waterings. So in establishing a shrub, giving it a small drink of water every other day is a good idea for a couple of weeks. And what I mean by that is, how do I measure through a garden hose? Well, you don't. You look at things through increments of, like, I'm watering it with 1 gallon every time I water it, because that root system's not out into the landscape yet. It's still confined to that pot. Oh, here's Jeff. Very good. I gave a couple away to trial. Haven't seen it, but the remaining ones looked good at the nursery in full sun. That's great to hear, Jeff. Yeah, and Jeff would probably agree. It's just coming out. This was I should also mention our friends at Bailey's Nursery. Bailey's is a major wholesale nursery up in Minnesota, and a lot of retailers in Nebraska order their stock from Bailey's. So this was an introduction through their program that they call New Additions. So this is a new addition to the landscape. Pretty cool looking shrub. Now look at that. So as the buds are starting to swell in the wintertime and into spring, it almost looks like a pussy willow, right? But this is a pussy willow that's more of a manageable size. If you've grown pussy willow, they can get up to 20 feet. Whereas this guy is more like 5 to 5 feet. But I think it has a very awesome look to it in March and April before it leaves out. And so there you see a close-up of the buds, like little miniature pussy willow buds. And then as these buds expand and open, flowering takes place. So this is a willow flower. And what we call willow flowers are catkins. And catkins are flowers that are, they're not a true flower. I can't just quite describe them well enough, other than it's an ancient flower compared to the true flowers of today. But things like bald cypress have catkins, the hazelnuts have catkins, oaks have catkins, things like that. But look at the reddish tinge as that bud's starting to swell, and then the little yellow dots you see is the individual flower. And all of the willows are very important, just like the buckeyes, to our early season pollinating insects that are looking for some food when they're emerging from their hive early in the spring. So the iceberg alley willow, a fantastic shrub for Nebraska's landscapes. You'll be happy with this bird. Very easy to grow, versatile, and tough. I see we got a couple in the chat. Let me just,
Yeah, they're mostly asking about shade and part shade and how they
Yeah.
would do.
Yeah, Elizabeth, great question with the part shade. I wondered the same thing with that look to it of a sage. It looks like something that would never grow in part shade. But yes, it does just fine in part shade. However, I would not give it let's say half day of shade. If it's 3/4 or 2/3 of the day it's shaded, it may not like that as much. So I would, certainly a half day of shade would do just fine, like the east side of the house or where it's getting morning light under a tree that's pruned way up. Maybe it's getting morning light, and then again during sunset, it's getting a couple of hours light later in the day. It'll do just fine in those conditions, which is great because, like I say, that ghostly gray look is hard to achieve in part shade with the sage group, because they have to have full hot sun, the artemisias of the world. All right. So unless there's more questions about the shrub of the year, let's move on to the perennial of the year. Excited about this one. And I'm a big fan of the salvia group. They've been around for us gardeners for a long time. And if you've been gardening with perennials a long time, if you go back to the 70s and the 80s when perennials were just starting to really make their way, the salvias were very popular back in the 80s, and not as much anymore. People are starting to gravitate more towards them with new introductions. And this is one of the new introductions out there. It's called the Marvel series. And Rose Marble is one of those. And what this salvia has is the largest flowers of any salvia that's in the trade. So you see those pink flowers, typical salvia flowers on those spikes are maybe half that size. Yes, it looks showy from a distance, but up close, those smaller flowers aren't very showy. Well, along comes Rose Marble, and you've got these big flowers that, from what I've heard and understand, it's almost fluorescent in the garden. It really jumps out at you, and especially with the low evening light, it stands out. You can see the foliage is attractive too. And you can deadhead this plant after it blooms. So it blooms late spring, early summer into July, and you can just kind of leave it alone and it'll bloom past the old blooms. But if you see my cursor here, here's the start of a spent flower right there. So you could go and cut this back for more rebloom, or just wait till it finishes its strong bloom and then cut it back. But if you look down at the base where my cursor is, you can see all these buds waiting down here. So you can cut it back hard by cutting off all the old growth back to the new foliage, and it'll kickstart a whole nother group of flowers for you. So you can get it to bloom twice strongly in late spring, early summer, and then again in early fall. I think that's pretty cool. So there's more of a close-up of the individual flowers, and the foliage is attractive. And I think that's one thing that set Rose Marble apart. I think one of the reasons people lost favor with the salvias is they looked kind of scruffy in the summertime. After they flowered, they would kind of open up and reveal the, it just kind of looked leggy. And so landscapers kind of went away from the Blue Queen salvia and stopped planting it. And now with this one out, man, I think it's kickstarting salvias all over again. And if you know the salvia group, yes, it's not native. However, I'm a big proponent of that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't plant them, because I see native insects all over the salvias. They go crazy for them. That means bumblebees, that means leafcutter bees, that means hoverflies, all of our native bees, as well as the introduced honeybee, take advantage of the salvias. And the salvias are medicinal plant too, so I know they're getting some beneficial nectar with that as well. Let's see, let's catch up here. Kathy asks, any idea how much this will spread? Another type of salvia is trying to take over my garden. Wow, Kathy, I'm curious which type that is. It could be the blue salvia, our native, which kind of seeds around a little bit. But no, this one, from what I understand, it does not seed. It does not develop seeds. So you should be just fine there. It's more or less a sterile plant. Oh boy. So Ardith, yeah, that's a question above my pay grade. So I'm not gonna address that one. Okay.
Bob,
Yeah.
there are a couple others that were higher up. So
Oh,
is
sorry.
salvia safe for cats and dogs?
Is what?
Is salvia safe for cats and dogs, or is it toxic? Do you
Oh
know?
gosh. Yeah, it's safe for cats and dogs. I think, if you look at that family of plants, the salvias, that would include garden sage. Are you worried about your dog eating garden sage? Probably not. Have you ever tried to eat a leaf by yourself or just garden sage, plucking it off the plant and sticking it in your mouth and eating it? You'll spit it out within probably 3 seconds. Sage is a good spice, but my, oh my, is it a bitter pill. So if your dog would happen to nibble on a piece, it's likely going to spit it out. So no issues with critters eating this plant.
Then Dean is asking what its life expectancy is. Is it long lived, short lived? Will it be around for a while?
I have to plead ignorant on that one, but if we compare it to, this is a Salvia nemorosa, or also called the meadow sage. And Salvia nemorosa, blue queen, Maynite, Cardona. There's lots of selections in the trade that have been around, like I say, since the 70s and 80s. Cardona is a little newer, but anyway, one of the reasons they were planted back in the day is because they're so versatile and tough, easy to grow, and long-lived. So yes, this is a perennial that's going to give you many years in the garden.
Then one more
I couldn't answer that.
from Shannon. Do they flop over when they get bigger? And do they have bare foliage in the middle later
Yes.
in the season?
Great question, Shannon. That's what I was trying to explain. The May nights of the world, why people aren't planting them anymore is because they would bloom, they would get kind of gaudy looking, and then the plant would open up to reveal the legs of the middle. And if you look at the base of that plant, you can see new growth. And oftentimes you would just cut it back to that new growth down at the base of the plant. But that's what sets Rose Marvel apart from the other salvias, is it doesn't open in the middle. It stays like a nice tight bunch, meaning I can cut it back to get it to give me a strong rebloom. But if I don't want to say lazy gardener, but if I'm a gardener with no time, don't worry about it. You don't have to cut it back, if that helps you out. For me, that's the type of gardening I enjoy. Not necessarily pulling weeds for 3 hours, but deadheading my salvia that takes me maybe 10 minutes. I'm good with that. Okay, are we caught up?
Yeah, we're caught up.
Yeah, and it's not an invasive species here. It's not one that's going to seed around. So, but great question. The salvias in general, and that's what Harlan, the founder of Bluebird Nursery, and he and I had many conversations about this. If you know how the cousins of certain plants behave, meaning the honeysuckles. If this was a honeysuckle, man, I probably wouldn't be promoting it, first of all. But we know how their cousins behave in the landscape, meaning none of the cousins have ever become invasive here. They don't seed around in the landscape. Indeed, they're sterile. So no worries there. Okay, I think we're caught up then. Okay, well, now let's move on to the grass of the year. And love this picture. Really kind of gives that why use grasses in the garden. For me, grasses, it's about the line, right? It's about that fine line. And the texture of a grass sets apart the perennial. It helps frame the flowers, right? And one of the most popular grasses out there now is little blue stem. But folks, when we started this thing called the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum back in the late 70s, little blue stem was not, I repeat, was not being planted in the landscape, period. Nobody knew how it would perform in the landscape. So thanks to the Statewide Arboretum, we used our affiliate sites as guinea pigs and said, well, let's find out. And lo and behold, I remember talking to Bluebird years ago. What's the deal with the big blue stem? Everybody wants it. We sold 50,000 plants last year, and that's what we want. We want a nursery to sell 50,000 little blue stems rather than 50,000 Stella Dea Aura daylilies, right? So little blue stem has come a long ways. And now in the trade, you guys, they come out with new selections every year. Some of these better than others. And quite honestly, I don't have my handle on all of the new selections out there, but if you're paying attention, there's quite a few. Prairie Blues is a relatively new selection that has really taken the landscaping world by storm. Um, First of all, it has this silver blue foliage, which is really attractive in the landscape. Not all little blue stems have that silvery blue foliage. And what I like about it is it's a seed strain, meaning they propagate it from seed, and it was found in nature, not produced by somebody in a lab coat in a greenhouse, right? This was found, a seed strain found in Missouri, so not far from Nebraska. So I think that's pretty cool. Again, what Prairie Blues has when it's emerging early in the spring, I love it when it's emerging. And this picture really kind of shows what little blue stem looks like. And if you look in the background of this picture, this is a shell leaf penstemon. So for me, knowing when shell leaf blooms, this is probably a late May, early June shot. So in early June, you have this beautiful tuft of foliage that's only about, maybe 6 inches high. Whereas this picture here you're seeing in the fall or more like summer when the gay feathers are in bloom, it gets up to around, a little over your knee, maybe 2 to 3 feet high. So great when it's emerging in the spring. There it is again in the landscape, highlighting with the coreopsis here and the cone flowers, and paying attention to where this is planted. This is a hot spot right here, and that's one of the things the little blue stems have is my oh my, they are so heat and drought tolerant. In fact, I would encourage you, if you plant a little blue stem, plant it in a place, get it established, and don't ever worry about providing supplemental irrigation to it. It doesn't need you for that. In fact, you'd probably kill this plant with kindness, more so than drought. Meaning, don't put a prairie style landscape like this under an automatic irrigation system. It's just not going to work, and you're wasting your money hitting it with an automatic irrigation system. But a close up of the foliage, that beautiful silver blue foliage. Here you can see that tuft that I showed you earlier. The flowering stems are starting to elongate up out of that tuft, getting ready to bloom. And then at that time, you'll start to get some splashes of color in the foliage already, some nice maroon colors. And then later on in the fall, the nice fall color on it. Not a very bright russet red like some of the little blue stems, but still holds its own with the fall color. There you see a close-up of the seed head of a little blue stem. And when it's backlit by that low light in the fall, really makes it stand out. So Prairie Blues, little blue stem, a fantastic new selection. And that's just another reason to plant grasses. Again, that backlighting literally will make a grass glow in the fall. One of my favorite attributes of a little blue stem in the landscape. Okay, how are we doing on time? We got like 20 minutes. Are we caught up on the chat then? Looks like we are, huh?
There's one question about the grass.
Okay.
Marcy wants to know if it's full sun only.
Yeah, great question. And I should have really hit that home. Because this prairie grass grows in our mixed grass and short grass prairies in Nebraska, I think for little blue stem to really be happy with your plant, you want wall-to-wall sunshine, hot spot in your landscape. You know, a lot of people will plant little blue stems in that inferno strip between the curb and the street because it meets the guidelines for height restrictions for those planting areas. So if you're looking to plant something between your street and your curb and create a pollinator-friendly area, by all means, plant grasses with those flowers. And also another thing to mention is the little blue stems are a host grass species to some of the skipper butterflies out there. So they will feed on them a little bit, but yes. The little blue stem is not evergreen. So that fall picture that you saw, it will turn that kind of that buff brown in the wintertime and just kind of hang out that buff brown all winter. So no, you have to cut it back in the spring, Nassim, and it'll start over from that basal cut that you made. But cut it back as far as you can, because in grasses, you guys, the new growth is just below the soil. So you don't want to leave, when you're cutting a grass back in the spring, you don't want to leave like 6 inches or a foot of that, because then the new growth has to come up through there. You can cut it down to a 2-inch stub. And I'm assuming, will the grass grow in sandy soil? I'm assuming it was a sandy soil. And yes, that is one of the benefits of little blue stems, is they thrive in sandy soil. And so plant away, it will do just well. Should we be setting up sprinklers and water today and tomorrow? Well, I think we still have frost in the ground. I don't think the soil or the water is going to penetrate with that. I'd dig around and see how frozen your soil is, because if your soil's frozen and you're watering, it's just going to run off and you're wasting your time. So dig around, see how frozen it is before you would consider watering. And it depends if you're watering. If you're watering your grass just because it's grass, I'm going to tell you no. You can get that in the spring. It's just fine. It's dormant. Okay, so now we're done with the plants of the year. And by the way, and I'll have Michelle correct me if I'm wrong, you can go to plantnebraska.org, our website, click on the Great Plants page, and that is under the down drop under plant information, I believe, right, Michelle?
I will put the link in the chat.
Yeah, put the link in the chat. And the reason I mention this, folks, is if you're new to Nebraska, or even just new to gardening, or just looking for a great list of plants, we've been promoting plants of the year since 1998. So on our website, you'll find a cumulative list of all those plants. We don't designate when it won the award, because right now that doesn't matter. What matters is, here's 20 some different trees you can choose from, 20 different shrubs, perennials, grasses, conifers. So it's just a who's list of fantastic plants for Nebraska. And if you're really cool, you would say, well, I'm just going to do a great plants garden that includes all of these different plants. And I know people that have done that. Okay. Yeah, Marcy, full sun only, I'm afraid. And I believe you and me, Marcy, I want the grass at my house too. I don't have little blue stem at my house because I'm swimming in shade. So we just have to enjoy everybody else's little blue stem that can plant it in the hot, full sun.
And what's the maximum height?
The maximum height, and you'll see some little blue stems. I'm seeing some of the little blue stems out there get 3 feet tall, and those I think are getting irrigated, or you can back off the irrigation. If you put it in a tough, sunny site, it's probably going to stay more like 2 feet. If it's in rich organic soil, it's probably going to push up to 3 feet. So little blue stem in nature does not grow in rich organic soils. It can grow amongst rocks. It can grow in the sand. It's when it's put in our heavy clay with all that moisture that it can get up tall and floppy. So give it tough love, and don't mulch it too deep. If you're going to use wood chip mulch, just cover the surface. Don't bury that plant in wood chip mulch. It only wants around 1 inch of mulch, just enough to cover the soil. And if you're lucky, I appreciate little blue stems because they can seed around in the garden. And then you get some free seedlings here and there. Certainly nothing where you would say it's aggressive. You wouldn't want to call it invasive because it's native, but certainly not aggressive. But free seedlings here and there is a great thing. And then you can move those around once you identify, oh, this is a baby little blue stem. I'm going to move this around to another area of my garden. I used to do that all the time. It works really well. Okay, I think we're caught up, right? Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to tell you about, the Great Plants program over the years, and it was hard. Michelle made me delete a lot of slides because you know me, if you've heard me talk before, I'm done and I have 60 more slides to show you. But I can't help it, man. There's so many good plants, and there's lots of good releases that have taken place over the years. These are plants that were released through the Great Plants program. And maybe you're familiar with the Taylor juniper, maybe you're not. You see them all over Lincoln now. If you're in the Hastings area, you see them all over the Hastings area, Columbus area. And you see them all over the Columbus area because Alan Wilkie from Wilkie Landscape is the one that introduced this. Now, Alan's no longer with us, but he discovered this plant out in a pasture near Taylor, Nebraska. And I don't think not everybody knows that. So here was this pencil thin eastern red cedar growing out there. He collected some cuttings and found out cuttings wasn't the best way to produce this plant. So now they graft it because it's quicker. You'd have to wait years and years by cuttings. So anyway, it stays and keeps this nice tight shape to it. And here's the original. This was the first one planted in a landscape from that original discovery out in the pasture. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the tree out in the pasture, but this is a church in Taylor, Nebraska. And look at those scruffy little evergreens next to it. The Taylor's like going, "What's with you guys? Look at me, man." I'm like, I'm taller than the church. This picture's, I don't want to say pretty old, but I need to, when and if I make it to Taylor next time, I'm going to go see if that big Taylor juniper is still there. Ultimately, it can get 30, 35 feet tall. And the width you see there is around 4 feet. So 35 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and the windier, the better. The hotter the sun, the better. Where I've seen Taylor juniper struggle is in too much shade. If you give it part shade, you're going to have kind of an open, I don't know, not a full dense shrub. They're so proud of the Taylor juniper that they put up a sign in their city park, and the Taylor community has become an Arboretum affiliate site. How cool is that? And stay tuned. We're hoping to do an event up in Taylor next summer. If we do, we will let you know, and hopefully you can participate. So how cool is that? And this gal, Mara, she's a Sandoz, related to Marie Sandoz from back in the days. And she has a little shop there in Taylor, and she sells the little seedlings right out of the little shop. I think that's pretty cool. So the shop is called Grow Taylor, and you see these, maybe you know Taylor, Nebraska for these artist cutouts. She's the artist that makes these. How cool is that, right? So if you make it to Taylor, stop by the shop and say hi. And probably the most public location that I know of that the Taylor juniper is planted is at Nebraska's state capitol. So on the west side of the capitol, you can see some nice specimens of the Taylor. I think that's pretty cool. They're like a sentinel, right? A prairie sentinel out there in the landscape. Tough as nails. Another one I want to tell you about is the prairie gold quaking aspen. And quaking aspens are native to Nebraska. But the ones that are native to Nebraska, there's like these little tiny populations here and there that are remnant or relic populations of when our climate was more favorable for the aspens. The aspens are a Rocky Mountain species up into Canada, but again, just a few patches here in Nebraska. Well, back in the day, again, back in the 80s, when we had plant people hunting for plants, this time Harlan Hammernick, a lady came to him there at Bluebird Nursery and said, "I know of a stand of aspen trees growing between Lee and Columbus, Nebraska." And if you know where Lee and Columbus is, that's by the Platte River. And anyway, they collected some root cuttings, planted it there in Clarkson, and away we go. And then thanks to my friend Todd Fowler at Fowler Nursery, he got this plant introduced through the Great Plants for the Great Plains program and got a major wholesaler to propagate it. So now Fowler Nursery is kind of hanging their hat on the Prairie Gold quaking aspen. Indeed, they named their wholesale nursery Prairie Gold Nursery after this tree. And the cluster that you see planted on the left is in York, Nebraska. Heck, it could have been a picture taken out of the Rocky Mountains, right? So aspen found in Nebraska. Why is that important? Well, if you look at this foliage, we call that clean foliage. The aspens that were pulled out of the higher elevations and planted here in the plain states struggle. They would often die of diseases. They would get black spot diseases on their leaves. They would look scruffy. And usually after about 5 to 7 years, you were taking the thing out. But Prairie Gold has very clean foliage, good, tough plant for Nebraska. This is a stand that Todd actually planted at his nursery there along Highway 34 in York County. Beautiful golden yellow fall color, right? And again, clean foliage on that plant. He even planted some out in a brome pasture, which is a tough place to plant a tree because a brome pasture, you guys, that is some serious competition for that tree. And the quaking aspen's just shrugging his shoulders saying, I got this. And he's seeing great fall color out there. And indeed, this pasture, he also planted a bunch of conifers. So you're going to really get that, I guess, that Rocky Mountain feel in the landscape with those two combined together. And of course, the nice white bark of a birch tree. It looks like, are we having to catch up on the chat here?
There's a couple questions. Well, mainly one, about whether they're susceptible to bagworms.
Oh, yes. Great question. And Ann,
The Taylor juniper.
Yeah. And thanks, Ann, for pointing that out. I forgot to mention that the buffalo there at Pioneers Park here in Lincoln is surrounded by Taylor junipers. And the story I can tell you quick is they used to be the woodward juniper and they were all dying out. And I convinced Steve Nozzle when he was with the Parks Department to replace them with the Taylor juniper. And I'm so glad he did. Yes, Mark, I've seen bagworms on the Taylor juniper, not as bad as like the shrubby junipers that you see out there in the world. But yes, they can still get bagworms, something to monitor. And if they do get bagworms, that's a whole nother story for another day. I'm not going to go into bagworm control, but easy to control. You just have to make sure you monitor your babies and keep your eyes on them. And then at Yanni Park in Kearney, I'm looking forward to making it back to Yanni Park in Kearney. Well worth the visit, folks. And Yanni Park, our friends there at Steinbrake Nursery, border this whole area of the park in quaking aspen. So this picture is probably about 3 or 4 years old. So I'm looking forward to get back to see if they just completely walled off that area and own the zone. That's a good example of if I was to plant it in the landscape, here's how I would treat a quaking aspen. Plant it so it can form a colony and then separate it with a mulch bed from your turf area because yes, it can sucker out into this grass, but mowing it once a week, it doesn't stand a chance. It will not, it keeps it at bay, if you will. Hopefully that makes sense. And then finally, I'll tell you
one other question about prairie gold aspen. What are the ideal growing conditions?
Yeah, great question. Ideally, full sun. They don't perform as well in part shade. If you do have part shade, at least a half a day of sun would be preferable. But yeah, they're a full sun tree. And man, they can really take it dry. If you live in a new development where your soil is like that basement subsoil, they're not going to perform as well as they would in well-drained soil. So they want decent drainage, meaning you don't want to baby this with an automatic sprinkler system. Think about where you've seen quaking aspens grow in nature, in the mountains, right? Is anybody up in the mountains with their hose watering those quaking aspen? No, they are not. So quaking aspen doesn't need supplemental irrigation from us once they get established, if that helps.
How would they do as part of a windbreak on a small acreage?
Yeah, it would not be my first choice as the windbreak, but a component of the windbreak. Like say you have a grouping of conifers and then you do a grouping of aspen, another grouping of conifers. And of course, I want you to mix in some wild plums, some thicket shrubs in that windbreak too. But yes, definitely could be a part of it, just not the main component of that windbreak, if that helps. Cool. Okay.
We're caught up.
We'll end with this one. One of my favorite trees. It's got a wonderful story to tell. That is rough gay feather blooming there, by the way. This is the dwarf chinkapin oak growing naturally down in southeast Nebraska, near Falls City area. If you know where Richardson County is, down along the Kansas border and Missouri and Iowa border. This is the only known population in our state, and it's the largest population of this little species in the world. How cool is that? And down there in this population, we've witnessed it growing as a ground cover. Here's an oak. What you're seeing here, this ground cover probably started from deer browse, but it's only a foot tall. And I've actually plucked an acorn off of this tree only a foot tall before. Isn't that crazy? So I'm wanting a landscaper that's listening out there going, I'm going to plant a bunch of these and then I'm going to cut them down to the ground and make it be a ground cover. There you can kind of see the scale with this backpack here. This is Jeff Carson's backpack, just to let you know. Jeff spoke at a plant talk last year out of Iowa State, so he was down there collecting acorns with us that year. But yeah, now that short plant that you're seeing there, no, it does not stay that short in the landscape. But you can see all the cedars that were encroaching on this population. So we got a bunch of people together. This was a number of years ago. Hopefully you recognize some faces in that picture. We got together and removed all the cedars. There's the after. And then it was burned. So what you're seeing are dead tops of dwarf chinkapin oak, which for me, loving this tree was a hard thing to swallow. I was hoping we didn't kill this tree when we burned it, but lo and behold, here's the old burned part of the tree. Here's all the new sprouts coming up under the tree. It just shrugged its shoulders and said, one of my attributes is I respond to fire. So you can burn me to your heart's content and I'm going to come back just as strong as ever. There you can see an old burned out stump. And then the plant coming back here. No more eastern red cedar. We eliminated it. Pretty cool. And there's some good prairie going in with those plants. Gorgeous acorns in the fall. Whoops. Looks like I messed up that picture. Don't mind that one. But there's my friend Mike out collecting with us that year, and my friend John collecting acorns, getting hidden by the shroud of the shrub. And there's the national champion here at that same site. Nebraska does have a national champion tree. Yes, it's no redwood, but hey, we got to have a champion somewhere. It's around 25 feet tall, full grown. And these three youngsters right here skipped class that day so they could go collect acorns. Shh, did I just say that? But there it is in the landscape. Look at the foliage. I mean, give me a break. Does it look like it's been shellacked? It's thick, it's leathery, and plants that cover themselves with shiny foliage like that is an indicator to you that I am extremely drought tolerant, because that shellacking, that waxy leaf, that thick leathery leaf holds in moisture. So it's an indicator to you, without even having to look at a tag, that it wants full hot sun. It wants you to not irrigate it. It's incredibly tough. And if you've ever been up that hill on a hot summer day, you would know what I'm talking about. It is cooking up there. There you can see the young acorns developing right there. In the spring, as it's leafing out, here you can see a young leaf leafing out. Oaks have catkin flowers. This oak, in my opinion, has the showiest catkins of them all. And because it's an oak growing at eye level, meaning it's more of a shrubby oak, you can actually enjoy the flowers. A beautiful sulfur yellow. Gorgeous thing, is it not? Or is it just me? I think that's pretty. And can you say that about other oaks in flower? Heck, you need a binoculars to look at them in flower because it's way up on the tree, right? Cool stuff. Gorgeous foliage. The fall color, nothing to write home about. They can have some reddish tones to them, but more of a bronzy yellow, if you will, in the fall. The dwarf chinkapin oak, that's what the habit looks like on an old tree. If we had core dated this tree here, it's probably 80 years old. So they take their time to get to that thickness of trunk. But in the landscape, you can expect around a 25-foot tree with a habit much like an Amer maple, multi-stemmed. And our friends at Great Plains Nursery, north of Lincoln, have really kind of hung their hat. This is their signature tree, just like the Prairie Gold Quaking Aspen is the signature tree at Fowler. Great Plains Nursery, if you ask Heather, what is the tree that you want to say defines Great Plains Nursery? It's the dwarf chinkapin oak. Plant it, you'll be happier dead for posterity, if nothing else. This tree is listed as threatened in 8 of the states it's native to, and I would also say it's threatened in Nebraska because of that population. Had we not done cedar control, they would have overtook it and it'd be gone. So plant it just for posterity, if nothing else. That's all I got. Unless there's any questions.
Yeah, there's a couple. How does dwarf chinkapin do in clay soil?
You know, they do okay in clay. I would just make sure that clay is not irrigated, so it's not holding a lot of moisture. And if you do have clay soil, try to create a planting zone for it or any other tree. If you've got new development, basement subsoil clay, I always say try to get that root zone out of the muckety muck, meaning raise the soil a little bit. And I'm not talking berm it, but just create a bed by raising it with good organic soil, pulverized topsoil compost mix. So you're actually creating a planting bed to plant that tree in the middle of, if that makes sense.
And Joseph is asking, he said he bought one at Spring Affair in 2023 and it's right now growing multi-stem. So should he let it go or train a leader?
Oh, great question. Yeah, and sometimes the question will be, well, mine's single stem. How do I get it triple stemmed? I would say yes, leave it that way. Well, how do I know when I need to prune it? When I planted that one picture I showed you with the little meatball shrubs, I didn't prune that for probably 10 years. Didn't have to. I let the thing grow into its own. So let it be multi-stemmed. Let it grow as a habit of a multi-stem small tree. But yes, in the nursery, they will set some aside that are growing in the pot or in the container as a single stem, and they will sell it as a single stem too. If that makes sense.
I'm just looking at, I think we got all the questions. There is one, if you scroll up, there's one more about the aspen and suckering. Question about suckering.
Oh, good. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I see there's lots of questions. Is it a good, yeah, there's Fowler. Okay, hold on.
Here, I'll find it. Sorry. Okay. If it suckers out, will it become invasive?
If it suckers out, will it become invasive? Well, again, that word invasive in my mind is set apart for exotic plants that are introduced here. The word aggressive is set apart for our native plants that maybe don't play nice. And yes, a quaking aspen doesn't always play nice. So you're not going to want to plant this thing. Say you have a privacy fence and you put it on your side of the fence in a landscape bed. Well, it could sucker under the fence into your neighbor's yard. And then your neighbor's not going to be very happy if they don't want a quaking aspen. So yes, keep it confined to a planting zone, and that confined space is what I was talking about. Confine it with a mulch bed, and then if it wants to sucker outside of that mulch bed, you're keeping it controlled with mowing. Meaning, don't necessarily plant it with a bunch of other plants. I know I've done this before. I had a stand or a grove of quaking aspen, and I decided to plant bulbs down at the base of them. So I was digging all these holes and cutting roots of the quaking aspen as I was digging the holes. Oh my, the next year there were aspen suckers coming up everywhere. And I was like, whoopsie, don't do that again. And I see your question, Aaron. Yeah, the native to Gage, Richardson, Nemaha, Odo, Sarpy, Douglas, Pawnee. Gosh, I question that. I question the accuracy of that. I'd want to go right to right to the source on that one. Okay, I know of some in Nemaha and Odo, but the one in Nemaha, it's like two little plants. What I meant by that, Aaron, is that in Richardson County, where we go, that's the largest known population in Nebraska. And of all the other states, it's native. It's a plant here, a plant there. Whereas that stand we go to, there's dozens of them, if not hundreds of them. That's the difference.
Okay, one last question. About dwarf chinkapin. Is it susceptible to any diseases?
No, not that I'm aware of at all. And it's been growing down there in Richardson County with no help from humans for millennia. So very versatile, tough. I mean, it's just so tough. It is growing naturally or not naturally, it's growing planted in Kimball, Nebraska, Scotts Bluff, places like that, and not skipping a beat. And I've been told from my friend that lives up in North Dakota, Greg Morganson, who I think has been on a plant talk too. He said you can tell people it's hardy to ambient minus 45. That's cold, folks. Nebraska has not even touched minus 45 before. So hardiness, toughness, not an issue. The only disease problems or issues that I've ever seen with it is when it's planted in too much shade. It gets mildew on the foliage. So give it full sun, give it a windy side if you have it. So think of it as a small tree I can plant, and I've got this really tough site that I can't irrigate. I can't get anything to it. I don't have room for a big tree, but I want to do an oak. Man, it's just a cat's meow for that.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Bob. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Just as a reminder, all of our plant talks will be recorded. I will upload them to our YouTube channel and send out a link via email by the end of the day. So you should get that shortly. And then we have a bunch of plant talks this winter. So our next one is next Thursday, native trees, invasive species, and controlled burns. We have a guest speaker for that. And then January 30th, we're going to hear about the state of the forest from our state forester. So you can find out tons more information, register for whichever plant talks you're interested in at plantnebraska.org. And thank you so much. That's it for today.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.